Hello and welcome to Becky Live. I am Dr. Becky Andre, and I'm going to be your host for an intimate conversation about various leadership topics. My focus in these sessions is to provide a few frames or ways of thinking about a particular topic and to expand your awareness and thinking. My hope is that this isn't just a consumption of knowledge, rather that it sparks your thinking and you want to discuss with others around you. So this is part of a series this year on accelerating your development, where I explore the role of attachment, curiosity, play, and contemplation in the ongoing growth and development of adults. So this is the first video in the series where we'll examine these various different attachments to our identity, to others, and to beliefs or mindsets. What I'd like you to consider is what image comes to mind when you hear the word attachment, and even thinking about what that might signify for you. So I'll give just a few seconds for you to get that image in your mind. And the image that always comes to mind are things in nature. So I'm going to just kind of focus in on a tree. It starts as kind of an acorn or a seed, and it has to kind of break through that attachment or that constraint that is holding in all the things that become a tree. It breaks through, and it continues to kind of shed these attachments and continue to expand and grow. And it almost does it in a cyclical pattern. As it grows, it flourishes, it releases, it resets, and it starts the pattern again. And for me, when I think about development, it is this ongoing element that is always happening, this shedding and loosening, letting go, or allowing the new to emerge, which means that sometimes these attachments were necessary to create the conditions, and yet there are also things that we need to loosen our attachment to in order for that new to emerge and come through. So if we look at just the dictionary definition of attachment, you can see that there's various different things, everything from being attached to something, having a fondness for someone or something, or attaching to something. And I kind of think the key elements here for me when we look at attachments are the action of attaching to something and the affection or fondness for someone or something. And it is a part as we kind of go into adults and continue to develop, which is something that is relatively new. We used to think that you kind of stopped developing when you were maybe in your mid-20s. And now we know that development actually happens throughout your lifetime. And there's really kind of two things that are happening. There's this being where we're learning new knowledge, new skills. It's kind of more of like an accumulation. And there is this element of becoming, where we become more aware. We understand things in a deeper context. We see things in a different light. And you can kind of see this if you reflect back on your life in it tends to shift about every decade. Now, it's not guaranteed to shift, but you can kind of think about maybe how I thought in my 20s, how I thought in my 30s, my 40s, my 50s. And you can begin to see this element as adults of how our becoming emerges and unfolds. So at a more academic level, we call it hierarchical complexity, and there's various different theories around stages across human development. But we seem to kind of really understand, especially in the business context, that there's a certain level of complexity that someone needs to be able to navigate and manage in order to do certain jobs. There are different capabilities from a brand newborn baby versus a toddler who's learning to crawl or learning to walk, versus a teenager who's able to kind of have these abstract conversations with friends, and a theorist, physicist. All right. So there's different kind of levels. One isn't better than the other. It's just different. There's just different capabilities. All right. And so it's that becoming those skills as are becoming that understanding deeper, but the being is the skill development as well. So if we look at kind of how does cognitive complexity kind of start to happen? And we look at the intertwining between skills and understanding deeper, so that being and becoming is kind of intertwined. We start teaching a toddler how to put their pajamas on, and we provide a lot of support for them along the way, show them where the pajamas are, how to put them on. And then we might teach them how to brush their teeth. And then later on, we might teach them how to pick out a book to read before bedtime. And each of these elements are kind of discrete tasks or discrete skills. All right. We wouldn't ask a 2-year-old, go and put your pajamas on, brush your teeth, and pick out a book to read. Or we wouldn't say to them, go get ready for bed, because they're not ready for that. Cognitively, they need it still broken down for them. They need these discrete tasks, so they're building the skills and capabilities. And then, there becomes this magical point. I don't know, usually maybe around the time when they're 4, it can be different for other kids, where we can say, it's time for bed. And they know the routine, they know what to do. They're able to integrate all of these discrete tasks into this one thing, that it's time for bed. And they have the skills and the cognitive complexity to be able to handle that task demand for them. All right. So this happens to us as adults as well. All right. We have these different ways of kind of moving and becoming. All right. And as we are kind of going through these different levels or stages, and I want to remind us again that we're thinking about attachment as the action of attaching to something, or the affection or fondness for someone or something. All right. We tend to have a tendency to attach to an identity. How do I want to be viewed? How do others view me? And sometimes that identity can hold back our ability to step into a new way of being or a new way of thinking. But we can form these attachments kind of to our real self, who we think we want to be, how others perceive us. We might have some coping strategies that either keep us kind of attached to that. We might think about attachment to others, where there might be some social aspects or some political aspects that can be attachments that we have that are hard to let go of, because it might shake or shift some dynamics in our relationships, and we have this human need for belonging. We have beliefs that we attach to. Sometimes they're kind of unknown to us or unconscious. So wherever we're born in the world, we are kind of socialized to particular norms and beliefs that we become attached to as a way of understanding the world. You might even think about when you went to MBA school or even undergrad. Educators are providing these attachments to you, an attachment to a model that is going to provide a certain level of effectiveness, right? And these attachments help us make sense of a complex reality. They provide understanding and they provide a sense of stability. And yet there is this essence of we kind of know when we need to loosen an attachment. And I'm going to read a poem. It's an excerpt from You Know When It's Time to Go from Still Possible Poetry by David White. So even in the midst of thinking you'll never be ready, even when you feel you have never deserved that freedom to go, even under the comforting illusion that you never had a single speck of faith in what you want, you have already packed your silent reluctance away, lifted your ear to the morning birdsong, and before anyone can wake, you are already out the door, down the road, around the corner, and on your way. And it's really interesting to me when I start working with coaching clients and we're looking at kind of movement and growth. They're clinging to the old, all right? They're clinging to those attachments that they have, that identity, that model, that way of making sense of the world. And yet they've come to this moment with me. And it's almost like I remember one coaching client It was almost like they were asking the question if they should be on this path, if they should be making this move. And I pointed out to them the various ways that they had already started down this path, that it wasn't a matter of whether or not you were going down this path. You've already gone down the road and around the corner and you're on your way. Now it's just a matter of exploring that, loosening that attachment and that movement towards something else. And so one of the key things, those attachments provide an anchor. We have to have them in order for that new emergence or that new possibility to come. But that anchor at a certain point leaves us wanting more, seeking more, right? And so there is this sense of movement, of yearning for something, but not really knowing what we're yearning for, all right? Typically today, that movement happens with some sort of disorienting event. Now, if you've read any of Dr. Robert Kegan's work, he would say we find ourselves in over our heads. There's pain, there is yearning, there is longing, all right? If you read any of kind of Dr. Theo Dawson's work or Dr. Kurt Fisher's work, the movement is happening because we're being faced with more complex cognitive demands than maybe what we're capable of. And so those colleagues of mine describe it as the Goldilocks zone. So if you're in the United States, we have this fairy tale about Goldilocks stumbling into the house of the three bears. And one is she kind of tests out these different things in the house. One is too small, one is too big, one is just right. All right. And so that's kind of that movement. When we're looking at loosening attachments, we're creating that Goldilocks zone. We're creating the opportunity for some movement to happen, for us to see things in a different way. To see how how maybe this disorienting event is opening up space for something new to emerge. Now, along the way with this movement and change, there is always some sort of loss. Now, sometimes that loss is easy to navigate, sometimes it's difficult, and sometimes we aren't ready for it. But there is a sense of giving up the old attachment, and yet we're still yearning for a new attachment that we don't know yet exists. And so the pain of non-movement might actually propel us through the loss. And sometimes when the loss becomes into view, we decide against the movement. So whenever I'm working with clients on loosening attachments and kind of moving into that new way of thinking, it's always an invitation because I know that there potentially could be some pain along the way, and they have to be ready and willing to face that. It doesn't do me any good to drag them because the development and the progress isn't going to happen. Now this is Kubler-Ross's change curve that kind of talks about the different things that happen. It suggests that things can happen in a linear place. Now this has recently kind of, I've read some articles that question the application of this into different realms and other than what it was originally designed for. I think that's a fair statement. And I think it's also important for us to kind of recognize that as we are loosening some of these attachments and moving into other ones, there might be some of these feelings that come up. I remember one coaching client, we had been working on shifting their complexity of thinking, which was loosening attachments to old kind of mindsets and ways of thinking and adding in some new ways of considering things. And they weren't able to quite see it yet. And there was some frustration. And we had iteratively been working on learning, but that frustration and that emotion was there. And we had to name it so that so it didn't derail the progress. And so it can be helpful to kind of know that as we are wrestling with some of these things, as I'm loosening attachment to something I deeply connected with, and it provided results for me, provided some sort of comfort, stability, it's going to create some sense of loss and some emotions. And the degree of it's going to be different for every person, but it's going to be there. Now, as we are using these attachments as kind of a framework to loosen the previous attachments, to open up for the new one, it's really critical that you have support, all right? So the level at which people perform without support is kind of their functional level, but it's not really great at that movement, all right? And the level at which people can perform with appropriate support is at their optimal level. So we're kind of getting the best of people as they are kind of on that edge of growing and developing. So we think of appropriate support as having kind of two components, a realistic goal and the right amount of support. So in other words, we want to hit the learning edge or the sweet spot and provide just the right amount of challenge and support to support a specific learner for their individual needs, right? And so I said kind of before, some of my colleagues and I like to call this the Goldilocks zone of how do we create kind of that just right challenge for them in order to move things. And when I think about attachment, I also think about kind of this bridge. When people are coming to me, there's some sort of pain, whether it's recognized or not, that is calling them forward. They're willing to take the risk to step out onto this wobbly bridge in the fog, and they don't know what they're walking towards, right? And I don't know what they're walking towards. I have a general sense of kind of well, not a general sense, I have a deep sense of the stages and the levels and the phases and the attachments. And I also don't know where that journey is going to go because it looks different for everybody, all right? The general realm is, it kind of looks like this, where the green is one level, and there's different things that are happening within that level that open up space for kind of that second level, and then the third level, and then the fourth level of the purple down below. And you can see that the connections, this web looks different for everybody based on kind of where they're thinking. But this change in phase or level, as are the terminology that I use, is a major restructuring of thought. It issues in a new kind of concept, right? So it's not just about adding new knowledge or adding a new skill. It actually is changing. And so remember I talked about that coaching client that was getting frustrated. We just kept working on things month after month after month. Well, every year I usually take a month sabbatical. And so when I came back, my client was very excited and they started mapping things out on a piece of paper. And they said, I think I see it now. And I'm watching it unfold, and I could see that the movement had happened. All right. We had prepared the brain, and when the brain was ready, the brain moved, and he had had a major restructuring of his thought. All right. And he was so excited to tell me the story about how he'd gone through 2 weeks of really difficulty, of frustration, of pain, of doubt. And then he said he wasn't sleeping very well during those 2 weeks. And again, I don't recommend, not sleeping. And it was just part of the process of his brain of getting ready for that movement. And he said that there was one day he woke up and he just saw it. And that is what happens is when we are loosening these attachments, we're not kind of holding onto them tightly anymore. We're opening up space. But we're in this limbo, we're in this liminal space. We don't know what's going to happen, all right? And then all of a sudden, something new emerges, and it's this new way of seeing the world. And I like to think about it as, if you think about those horses that have blinders on, if I keep attached to those blinders, this is all I see. If I start to loosen those blinders, I start to see a little bit more, and then I start to see a little bit more and a little bit more, all right? And so one of the things that I use are Lectica assessments to help my clients. And I kind of went through each of their levels and phases, and I won't get into kind of the precision around it and the academics around it. But at a very basic level, Lectica describes their levels as kind of linear, systems, and principle. And then within each level, there are 4 phases. All right. So advanced linear kind of has 2 phases to it. Early systems has 2 phases. Advanced system has 2 phases. Earlier principles has 2 phases to it. And there's things before and there's things after. I'm just only including kind of a short realm on this hierarchical complexity. But advanced linear is about 65% of the population. Now, that's a rough estimate of all adults, but really what they are attached to is looking for cause and effect. They're looking for they see individual points of view as creating conflict, so they oftentimes will not go out and look for other points of view or engage with them, or if they do, they think about it as kind of like winning a debate. They don't know how to resolve differences or bring differences into action. So sometimes they'll kind of, again, not address them or not go looking for them. And the question that they think a lot and that they're kind of attached to without realizing it is, if I do this, then what do I get? It's kind of like, if I do X, I get Y. Again, a very linear type of a thinker. And then we move into systems thinking. So about 30% are kind of in early systems, maybe about 5% is in advanced systems. And you can begin to see that they're attached to different things. So when we're early on in our systems thinking, we're really attached to our own individual view of the problem. And we look to align other views with our own view, all right? And we can resolve small differences or bring simple differences together to action. And the question that they're attached to is, how do I help people see or get aligned to what I see? Now, I can't skip phases. I can't skip levels, all right? So we have to allow people to kind of attach to these particular types of things. And they have to attach to them for a while before they're ready to loosen the attachment to them. And for a while, it can sometimes be a decade. Sometimes with the right support mechanisms, it can be as short as 18 to 36 months. Advanced systems have a different attachment. They are attached to their curiosity around how my perspective is different from others. They now have the capabilities to resolve complex differences or bring complicated differences together to action. And the question that they're asking and attached to is, how do I use the dynamics going on in the system to create options for whatever we're facing? And then early principle, less than 1% of the population kind of gets into this principled thinking. They're attached to understanding broad shared principles that govern systems and interactions. So they're looking for these underlying structures that hold things together. They can work successfully with chaotic workplace problems. And the question they're looking at is, how do I strategically distribute power by developing systems that foster continuous learning, collaboration, and collective engagement, right? And so you can see these different attachments. Now, one is not better than the other. And the question I always like to ask is a 2-year-old better than a 4-year-old? And the answer is no, and it depends. All right. If I need someone to pick up socks off the floor, the 2-year-old is perfectly capable of performing that cognitive complexity. If I need someone to maybe sort the laundry or fold the laundry, a 4-year-old might be better suited for that job. And so just like in the business setting, we have to think about these different capabilities and what we're asking of people and what they need to be doing. But for you, it's just important to kind of pay attention to, what am I attached to? And how might I loosen that attachment to open up the space for the new? So one of the things that you can do is ask yourself some of these questions, thinking about models that you're attached to. So you might have a particular problem-solving model or a particular profit revenue model or some economic model, and be thinking about why you're attached to it. And then start to think about, what are those limitations? That helps you shift kind of that attachment. You also might go back to the chart I shared previously and think about, what question or outcome am I most attached to? And am I willing to loosen that attachment to make room for growth? You might also think about, what support might I need to loosen an attachment? Do I need a coach? Do I need an assessment that precisely kind of tells me where I'm at and where I'm moving towards? Do I need a challenging assignment? What do I need? All right. And so it's all of these elements that go into helping you form these attachments that allow you to loosen that attachment and then create another kind of level or another way of being. So I hope that that was informative for you of thinking about your own development, reflecting on attachments that you have right now, thinking about ways you might be able to loosen them, and then grow into that attachment that you're doing. So I want to thank you for watching the video. I have some QR codes up here that you can click on to connect with me on LinkedIn. You can go to our website and take a look at our services. This is one of the core functions of what vertical leadership consulting does is we focus on developing leaders' complexity of thinking. So we look at the attachments that you have. We help you kind of loosen your tight on them or your grip on them. And then we invite you in to explore that new attachment that we know is kind of lurking there. And we give you practices and support to do that. You can also, if you're watching this after the fact, you're in the BeckyLIVE or Becky Andre channel, but here's a link to kind of get to our channel and subscribe to that as well. So I want to thank you very much. If you are interested in the other series, again, I'll be talking about curiosity on May 17th. You can scan that QR code and get registered. I'll be doing play on August 16th, and I'll be doing contemplation on November 15th. So the way in which we accelerate our development, there's also a way to leverage curiosity, to leverage play, and to do more than just reflection, to really go deeper into contemplation. And so we'll be exploring those things. So thanks for joining us today. It's been a pleasure to have you here. And if there's a way that vertical leadership can support you, I'd be happy to share that with you. Thanks so much.